had to come and show, etc., etc. So I'm very sorry about it. Just my stupidity. I should learn to carry IDs. The problem is that when you once have been a very important person, you just assume that you can walk into any place you want to, do whatever you want to, and when they regular citizen, you get a shock. But welcome everybody. You've already been welcomed. This morning I was reading the London Guardian. Another reason probably why I'm late. Uh, and the front page story was one which brings us to reality about what's happening as far as climate change is concerned in this world. The world is in quite a lot of trouble as far as climate change is concerned. You know that one of the big and very popular United States campaigning slogans in the current campaign is drill, baby, drill. That's a very popular campaign which is winning Donald Trump a lot of votes. And that's the most powerful and richest country in the world. So it gives us a bit of reality about, where things are at. And as we know that the world has been warming up a lot faster than anybody expected. I'm sure you'll hear about it from others in greater detail. And we don't have to look very far to see all of the climate-induced natural disasters that have been happening all over the show. In the forest fires in KwaZulu-Natal in the past few weeks, 6 firefighters died. We have, and all over the world, we have a terrible situation. But this morning's Guardian story, it is quite out. It's something that you should all just have a look at it, because it says that in 2023, the United States of America issued a number of new licenses for oil and gas extraction projects. They issued 758 new licenses. And this isn't under Donald Trump, who says he's going to open the floodgates. This is under the current administration. 758 new licenses. The story also says, it's a UK paper, that in the UK, by the end of this year, the UK would have issued 72 new oil and gas licenses this year in 2024. And then it goes on, in particular, talking about Norway, Australia, and Canada. And it says that these countries are really on a sort of sprinting out there. And it just gives us a bit of reality about what actually is happening in this world, that we face quite a tough uphill. And sometimes I think that South Africa is a reasonably responsible country, of course. But stories like these, and this is not anything new to any of you, of course, but whenever it faces you, you wonder whether we're doing enough to put pressure on the rich and powerful countries to stop this. Because they are the ones that have brought us to where we are in the world, and they are continuing sort of nonstop. And we have a strange situation, and partly because of the absence of more in-depth and scientific knowledge, there is this view that these countries that I've mentioned are the good countries, and we, the African countries, are the bad countries. It's sort of kind of a common wisdom, that they won't like us if we do this or that, or if we burn coal, then they won't like us because we won't be as good as them. So it's a strange sort of upside down view of the world that currently exists. And we're not, what's even more interesting is that in countries like South Africa and in various other African countries, uh, these same governments that are issuing these licenses are funding campaigns to stop oil and gas exploration on the African country. It's their money that is being used, their money. And so you, it just makes you think that that what the reality is. Uh, but as a Presidential Climate Commission, part of what we're doing uh, is to take stock of the reality. Where are we? And we are an independent body. I think that the Climate Commission is a remarkable body because it's made up of all of society, business, labor, government, the NGOs, and we've taken a long, hard look at where are we as far as climate action is concerned in South Africa. What are we doing? More important, what is it that we should be doing in order to do right? And so this is what the State of the Climate Action Report is about. And I'm very pleased and very proud of the Commission and the Secretariat and the people who have worked so hard to bring us to this point. And it's perhaps also timeless because it is the beginning of the seventh administration of our democracy. And I think it's sort of kind of something which the new administration can use to kickstart its work as far as climate is concerned. I should, of course, say that I have been in touch with Minister Dion George, as you know, who is the new Minister for Environment, etc. He would have been here today, but there is a three-line whip in Parliament, and so he actually can't get out of that. That's why he's not here. So he has sent his apology. But with that, we've got a number of very interesting people who are going to talk to us about the report itself and discuss it, and I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I had my ID and a copy of my license, but they did not accept the copy of the license, but they accepted the card ID. So that's why but I understand, and when we explained the apology that you're stuck up in the security checkup and you've got a record of starting on time. So that was accepted. But once again, thank you very much, and for also laying the context about what's happening in the world, and in preparing for this launch, and after the announcement of the Climate Change Act, which we must also say congratulations to the Commission on having the President signed it 2 days ago. A lot of the questions was about what about the other countries. So I think that you've hit it in the nail by raising it once again here. But with that said, colleagues, we now kick off hot, and Deputy Chair, the Minister indeed has sent in the Director General, Nomfundo Shabalala, sitting there to represent the department and to receive the report on behalf of government. And you know that when there was no cabinet, the DGs were powerful. It was them and the president. But now they are delegated. It's not constitutional. But even when there is government, they're powerful. Okay. Oh, well, I've never been there. I don't know. Let me call upon our commissioners. It used to be my ambition, but commissioners of the working group on monitoring and evaluation, and then Commissioner Mayor Kenale Mampukunzi into the panel, to the chairs here. Commissioner Jan Sarabi and Commissioner Shafiq Adams into the podium. The commissioners are the anchor of the monitoring and evaluation and learning working group, and that is that is, except the work that the researchers and the think tanks and everybody did to put this report together. These are the commissioner that says this is aligned to what our mandate is. This is the kind of government we can communicate to government a message. This is what we think is a fair reflection of the stakeholder perspectives. So they are like the filter of the politics and the science and the research, but without sugarcoating what the research would have done. Because if it was a board, there would have been a board subcommittee that ultimately says to the full board, here is the report from all the science and the numbers that we've crunched. And without much ado, let me call upon Commissioner Melissa Fourie to then do and gambit on the inaugural State of Climate Action report in South Africa. Commissioner Fourie.
Thanks, Blessing. Appreciate it. Hi, good morning, everybody. So my name is Melissa Fourie, and I'm one of the commissioners on the commission representing civil society in my case. Interestingly, the last time I was in this venue, we were protesting outside the SASOL annual general meeting and got into some trouble with probably the same security that the deputy chair was dealing with. But it also, it kind of, it also reminds me, what a fascinating institution this commission is, because it has those of us protesting outside. It also has those who are leading the fossil fuel companies here. And it's an extraordinary institution. I must say, I was quite sort of, as we say these days, triggered by the comments of the deputy chair just now. I mean, he's quite right that there is a lot of absurdities and inequities in the geopolitical aspects of climate. In fact, all aspects of climate, but specifically around the geopolitics. And we also have, we have companies in the north, countries in the north, doing all sorts of things that they shouldn't be doing. We also have fossil fuel companies that are larger than many countries funding oil and gas exploration in Africa at a time when this is not what we want to see, the direction we want to see Africa going in. And, on the upside, yes, we see the drill baby drill campaigns, but we also see a huge groundswell of the public, and particularly of young people, standing up and saying this is not the future we want. And we see it playing out in the elections in Europe, in the US, and I think we should take hope. We should take that in those movements. The Monitoring and Evaluation Working Group that has hosted the development of this important report, our job is to track progress on climate action and with the just transition in South Africa, and advise government on progress and necessary course corrections that need to be made. This working group has, for example, housed the Commission's work on Komati Power Station that many of you will be aware of. And we've developed a larger monitoring and evaluation framework for us to find a way to track what's happening on the ground and at different levels of the transition against the principles of the Just Transition Framework. Our working group is a diverse group of participants. We've got commissioners from labor, from business, from civil society, but we've also had the benefit of representatives from outside, from government in particular, thanks to the Departments of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, and the DPME, the National Disaster Center, all represented on our commission. And we've had this Monitoring and Evaluation Association, real experts, in monitoring evaluation being on our commission. And we've had community researchers from various areas in the country who are living with many of these climate impacts, but also transition impacts, who have joined us. In fact, there's some of them online, and I promised Ronald Mhlakaza that I would say a special hello to him. So I hope you can hear me. He's dialing in from Emalahleni. I want to just acknowledge that the huge job that has been done by the Secretariat on this report. Yuri is very, she's sitting in the corner, not looking at me, but Yuri and Katie Ross have done a huge job in leading the work on this report. Okay, after all that introduction, I've just brought my laptop so I can look at you instead of the behind me as we talk through this presentation. So we present today the first State of Climate Action report from the PCC, which we've couched as advice, essentially, which is what the Commission's supposed to do to the Government of National Unity on priorities for climate action. This is our first assessment of climate action in South Africa. And it's really a snapshot of how we're doing, how goes the battle, as we said while we were developing this, the progress towards the achievement of key indicators, towards reducing emissions, enhancing our resilience, and improving lives and livelihoods. The report focuses on where progress has been made, identifying specific indicators, and then also where there are critical gaps in climate action and what shifts and changes we are going to need to respond to this enormous challenge. And then we will, of course, be making separate and subsequent recommendations on how do we bridge these gaps. I should also say this report is, I think we're all clear, this is the first report. We don't think it's perfect. We think it's a great first start, but we're, of course, open to other inputs, including from some of our commissioners who've already spoken about some of these points for us to produce a better report when we do the next version in 2026. Okay, so the process that we followed, I mentioned that we identified specific priority indicators under mitigation, adaptation, finance, and the just transition, and then looking at very recent data up to 2023. Looking at the policy environment in which all of this takes place, the political, the development, economic factors in our complex country. We interviewed experts to gather the data we need, including from our government departments represented here today. And then a very interesting part of this report is a survey that was done by the Human Sciences Research Council. They did a nationally representative survey on the just transition, surveying more than 3,000 South Africans on perceptions, attitudes, etc., which I'll give you a couple of highlights from that in a minute. And then we got peer reviewed by 40 experts, more than 40 experts actually, from academia, from different sectors. I mean, it's actually quite extraordinary. I know some of them were sitting here. And we really appreciate the time that was spent on helping us get this right. Okay, so this is the structure of the report. It's the next slide, I think. This is the report outline. So there's the first section that really looks at the context in which all of this takes place. The second part is about the race to climate resilience. And you see it's also structured for that to come first. You know, mitigation is incredibly important, but because we're already dealing with climate impacts today, building our climate resilience cannot explain how urgent this is for our country to get ready. So that's the way it's structured. And I'm now going to talk you through the key findings of the report. Okay, so next slide there, please. So first headline key finding is just acknowledging the strong commitment and the public support that we already have for climate action and a just transition and for renewable energy. We've seen a huge amount of progress over the last 7-8 years in terms of preparing for climate action. Blessing earlier said we must congratulate the Climate Commission on the climate change bill. I really have to give credit to the department for leading that process so with such dedication. It's a huge achievement. It took 6 years. I checked this morning from when the first draft of the bill was published. Many of us fought about that bill. Some of us still don't love it, but it is a huge achievement for South Africa. And a big congratulations to the department for what they've achieved. I mean, I sat through many of those portfolio committee meetings, so I know the hardship that the officials went through. It was really a huge achievement. And now we just need to bring it into effect as quickly as possible, DG. So this is a huge thing for South Africa. The second part, which is something that the Commission can take credit for, is the Just Transition Framework, which was developed as a huge multi-stakeholder project and published in 2022 and approved by Cabinet. And that really is our kind of guidebook for what we want, the vision for what we want the just transition to look like. Particularly in terms of justice, and how do we make this transition justice? How do we make sure that we're in charge of the transition and not letting it happen to us? The Human Sciences Research Council, huge thanks to them as well. I'm not sure if they're here today, but I know they're still going to publish their report independently, is my understanding. There's their social attitudes survey. And here we see some really interesting findings coming out. First of all, South Africans totally get that climate change is happening to them. We see that 76% of respondents reported being personally affected by climate impacts. 78% reported being worried about climate impacts affecting themselves and their families. This just gives you a sense of how central this is in people's lives. The next slide. Tavi saying, I don't know if I can see you here. This is the old version of the presentation, by the way. So I'm just going to talk through the revised one, but just so you know, a majority of South Africans approve of efforts to move away from coal and towards and other forms of energy like solar and wind. Over half of the transition think that the transition away from coal will help alleviate load shedding. And 40% agree that the shift to cleaner forms of energy will reduce electricity costs and grow the economy. This is how far we've already come. Interestingly, in this survey, we also found that not a lot of people were familiar with the term just transition. And there's a huge amount of work to be done to socialize that term and what it means for people. But the issues behind that, people are very clued up about. They really understand what this is about. South Africans are generally in favor of stronger policies to support a just transition, economic diversification, education, reskilling issues, targeted employment opportunities, finance. People really came out very strongly in the survey to support those issues. Okay, the next slide, the mismatch between commitments and action. So this is the second major key finding of this report, is that despite all the strong public support and policy commitments, we've got a huge discrepancy between that and what's actually happening. Hello, welcome. We see contradictory public policies and positions, particularly regarding the future of the energy sector, as government has been wrestling, as you all know, with these trade-offs between energy security, economic growth, the health impacts of air pollution. Let's not always forget how our people are suffering from the air pollution from coal that they're breathing in every day, and responding to climate risk overall. We've got issues of inadequate technical and financial capacity. Later, we'll have Commissioner Pukunsi speak about local government, and we'll hear also from Salga later today. This is a massive issue, supporting our local government to be able to respond. They're the first line responders in all of these climate crises, and they need a lot of help and support. And then, of course, there's the finance issue. The Commission has done a lot of work on tracking finance flows around support for transition and climate. And we can see there, I won't read the numbers, but you can see there the numbers, the huge gap that we still have, particularly for adaptation. So this is a key finding of this report as well. Then the race to build climate resilience. Here we see that our vulnerability has steadily increased. And we see particularly food and water sectors affected, the most vulnerable to climate change. We'll hear some more from my fellow commissioners about that a little bit later. Our readiness to leverage public and private investment for adaptation has decreased due to persistent and high social inequality, complex business environment, declining state capacity. These are obviously issues that, that we try to do things, and it's not a neutral setting. We've got a lot of existing difficulties that we're dealing with, and yet we now have to get ourselves ready to respond to this enormous, once-in-a-lifetime type of crisis. And then when you see the national policies and commitments that we have in the National Adaptation Strategy, we see very few of them listed as being implemented or fully or even being implemented at the moment. So this is a huge challenge for us as a country. The race to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I'll just spend a minute talking about this because my colleagues will deal with the other issues. So South Africa, of course, is a significant greenhouse gas emitter and the largest emitter on our continent. Most of it comes from coal-based electricity. You can see the numbers there behind me. 2021, we had a nationally determined contribution update under the Paris Agreement. And we set our two ranges for 2025 and 2030. And we set an aspirational goal for net zero by 2050. So what the report finds is that we are, and this, by the way, is backed up by other reports, including the reports from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, is that we're on track to meet our 2025 greenhouse gas emissions target. But the problem really lies in the second target for 2030. And this report, which, as I said, is backed up by the sectoral emissions target report, cautions that if key policies are not implemented, we're not going to reach that 2030 target. And that particularly relates to changes in our energy sector and the transport sector, but specifically around the implementation of what we had in the 2019 integrated resource plan with the build plan for renewable energy and the decommissioning plan for coal power stations. This is particularly pertinent because we've now seen Eskom taking decisions to delay some of those, the decommissioning of power stations, without us having a clear sense of how they match, they connect those actions with the climate targets that we have to meet. Okay, so then the report looks at 4 sectors. I won't go through all of it in detail. The first one is the energy supply one and tracking specific indicators. Quite interesting. The renewable energy capacity, battery storage scale up, coal power capacity, and natural gas consumption. So both sides, as you can see. The report finds that there are positive systemic reforms underway in the electricity sector. There's a significant uptick in investment in renewables. I think we've seen that all around us. Every day there's more news about new renewable energy facilities. But those positive developments are significantly retarded by a slow rollout of grid infrastructure, weak support for local renewable energy industrialization, such as in the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, and a lack of coherent just transition approach to decommissioning of coal power stations. We've seen that firsthand at Komati, and as you know, we've done a lot of work in the Commission to try to support that sort of after the fact interventions at Komati, and hoping then to take that forward into to the next closure sites, some of that learning. Then the transport and automotive sector. We've got, we're tracking indicators. This is a very interesting field. I'm not an expert in it, but I'll just share with you what the Commission found here. Tracking indicators, number of public road transport vehicles, private ownership of vehicles, share of new electric vehicles in light duty vehicle sales, shares of NEVs in the light duty vehicle fleet, and the number of public electric charging stations. Interesting. We've seen strong policies here, the green transport strategy, for example, but it's suffered from poor implementation, and it's particularly impacted the rail and public transport systems, which are in a critical state with poorly maintained infrastructure, for leadership. I think we're all excited that our previous minister has moved to transport and can hopefully lead some significant changes in that sector. Key shifts would include increasing collective and shared transit modes and decarbonizing carbon-intensive modes of transport by adopting new energy vehicles. This is a very interesting area full of opportunity and full of risk. So that's going to be an interesting one for us to track. Then there are 2 other sectors, agriculture and water. I won't talk to that because my colleagues will do that. So I'm going to hand over now to, I'll start with Commissioner Pakunzi, and then followed by Commissioner Rabi from the agriculture sector, and then Commissioner Adams from the water sector. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Commissioner Melissa. Good morning, Deputy Chair, honorable fellow commissioners, esteemed guests and delegates, members of media. Good morning. We are very excited as sphere of government, that is local government. My name is Kinalema Mpukunzi. As mentioned, I am representing South African local government, SALGA. In brief, we are really excited about the developments that happened in the country, especially this week, where we noticed and witnessed the president signing the climate change bill into a law, a move that will make local government to ensure that local government actions are facilitated and are coordinated across spheres of government, and provide support to municipalities to determine climate change needs and develop their corresponding climate change response implementation plans. The Climate Change Act will assist in prescribing the much needed financial mechanisms to support the finance climate change response, planning and implementation by all spheres of government. This is also in line with the President's commitments to ensure that the institutional structure and the funding model for the local government that is fit for purpose so that municipalities are financially and operationally sustainable. Chairperson Salga welcomes this state of the climate action report. It clearly points out the very fundamental and structural challenges that are gripping local government and impeding implementation of climate action in this critical sphere of government. The report affirms the local government has a crucial role to play in responding to spatial and coordinated and just measures at the municipal level. Given the continued and increasing pressures of climate change that municipalities across the country are facing, acting at the local government is an urgent matter. Local government is a critical sphere of government in terms of provision of public services, but it is faced with a wide range of challenges, including governance, service delivery, and unemployment within communities. All these challenges are exacerbated by the extreme hazard caused by climate change. As a result, local governments, both urban and rural, are facing a negative impacts of extreme climate events such as severe droughts and heavily rains that causes things like desertification. This is pushing many communities whose livelihoods is dependent on subsistence farming and natural resources at risk, and on the one hand, and putting basic services and infrastructure under severe threat. On the other hand, as a frontline responders to the effects of global warming, municipalities must create sustainable development pathways for resilient communities. Municipalities are tasked with empowering individuals, communities, and businesses in their jurisdiction to engage in conversations around the transitions that lie ahead, and including the creation of new economic clusters. As all of us are aware that all of us seated here, we are from municipality. Our municipalities, we've got about 4,000 something wards, and all of us, we are from those various wards. So we are the most important sphere of government in ensuring that this climate action is being maintained and being realized. Maintaining the climate action and just transition is imperative in planning, budgeting, infrastructure and investment, and service delivery. Climate of adaptation requirements, as well as developing local climate action plans and integrated service plans and infrastructure investment plans. However, all this requires financial resources and technical capacity in municipalities to be able to effect these structural changes at a normal scale and speed. For this to happen, we need to join actions by all sectors of society and all levels of governments. Coordinating these efforts and ensuring the coherence within a multi-level governance system is key to driving forward effective, efficient, and ambitious climate actions. It is also important that municipality to gain access to climate finance that enables both immediate recovery from extreme events and their resultant losses and damage to key social and infrastructures, as well as transformation of service delivery that sees climate changes, mitigation, opportunities of the transition, as well as adaptability to long-term slow onset impacts. Building climate and disaster resilience requires single-minded purpose and bold leadership, but also coordination and collective will. As a result, this gathering must enrich the narrative of collaboration to empower our communities and local governments to better prepare and recover from the impacts of climate change. For us to be able to implement climate action at scale, it is key that all stakeholders work together to elevate cooperation in respect of efforts to respond to climate change by establishing a multi-sectoral local government climate change program that seeks to facilitate access to climate finance, sharing of best practice, knowledge, technology, innovation, climate-related technical skills, and training. As all of us, we are aware that our municipalities is not a one-size-fits-all, and our municipalities have different challenges. In closing, we all must commit to mobilizing all spheres of government, civil society, and private sector to set up and contribute towards building climate resilient, putting people and nature first in pursuit of a resilient world where we do not just survive climate shocks and stress, but thrive despite of all of them. Thank you, Melissa.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present the agricultural sector on the Presidential Climate Commission. It's a great privilege to be here, honor. I'm extremely excited about the launch. Very excited about where we live in the time we're living in. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we'll read in the report. Starting with the fact that obviously the agricultural sector and the water sector in South Africa is the most vulnerable, is facing increased vulnerability to the effects of climate change. We see that in anticipated yields, particularly to our staple foodstuffs and cereals in particular, the uptake of technology. We see that in the ratio of dam storage capacity to the population in general. So that vulnerability is clear and obvious to everyone to see. Together with that, a person needs to understand in South Africa that agriculture is a complex topic to talk about in general. In South Africa, we're nationally food secure. There's enough food to feed our population. But still, 1 in 5 households suffer severe risk of malnutrition or food insecurity in the country. And that is something that we all need to take to heart and treat with extreme sensitivity and seriousness. And we certainly try to do so in the Presidential Climate Commission. You'll also see that from the report too. The second feature. The third feature, I think, from the report that stood out for me is the capacity of South Africans to mitigate and manage the impacts of climate change is constrained by extreme inequality in the agricultural sector in particular. As a good colleague of mine at Agbus says, Wandile Shlobo in his recently published book, we live in a country of 2 agricultures. We have an extremely well-developed, established commercial agricultural sector. The farmers farm because there's no other choice. They're equally important, however, for food security in South Africa. It wasn't for the fact that we have this small-scale agricultural sector in South Africa, sometimes not out of choice, but out of necessity. That sector also plays an enormous role in the food security of the country, enabling people to be able to eat and to go to bed sometimes with food in their stomachs. Vitally important. I also want to mention that, and I'm not going to be much longer than I think needs to be. I think the report is extremely well drafted and explains itself very succinctly and importantly with the right information and the right level of information for present purposes as to what the agricultural sector actually entails and how climate vulnerability and climate change actually affects the sector. But we're also a sector that holds enormous promise, and I think we mustn't forget about that. I think the agricultural sector is going through enormous changes, which relates to efficiency, which relates to new technologies, but also enormous changes with respect to land reform, the uptake of climate-smart agricultural practices, and also creating a more equal and resilient agricultural sector. I've just had the opportunity to return from a climate smart agricultural conference, the World Congress on Climate Smart Agriculture, taking place as we speak in Cape Town. What I learned from that is there's enormous optimism in the agricultural sector too, which a person should neglect and shouldn't miss out on. I think especially in the fields of climate smart agriculture, efficiencies. And particularly in addressing the inequalities in the agricultural sector, there's room for enormous improvement, and we see that happening on an almost daily basis. I don't know if many of you know this, but what came as a surprise to me from this recent Congress is that South Africa, as far as our climate-smart agricultural practices are concerned, is leading the way. Climate-smart agriculture is a term which denotes a specific way of farming close to nature. No tillage, constant crop rotation, and making sure that there's a constant rotation of crops is the general perception or idea around climate-smart agriculture. And where in Africa we lag behind the rest of the world with an uptake of climate-smart agricultural practice of only 1%, South Africa is leading the way. We're at 25% at least, with certain provinces being as much as 51% of full uptake of climate-smart agricultural practices. And that is vitally important. What I've also learned from recent engagements on climate-smart agriculture, and specifically through the work of the Presidential Climate Commission, is that the just transition is utterly embedded in this notion of climate-smart agriculture. We need to involve small-scale small-scale farmers, as well as large commercial agricultural organizations and businesses from the outset. It's not a question of being involved from A to Z, being involved from B, C, D to Z. You need to be involved right from the very outset, which I think is what we've learned from our engagements and our experiences in the mining sector in particular. In that regard, I'm extremely positive about the outcomes of the report. I'm also extremely positive about for agriculture as well as emerging agricultural sectors in the context of climate change. We're at the moment where opportunity, as I often say, the opportunity of a lifetime needs to be utilized within the lifetime of the opportunity. And we're there. I do believe that we're on a good footing, a solid footing with institutions like the Presidential Climate Commission, as well as with the vibrancy in agriculture altogether. That is good for our society and good for our country as a whole. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, everybody. Also, congratulations to everybody who drafted this report. I think we're looking forward to future iterations thereof.
Good morning, everyone. Shafiq Adams here. I'm from the Water Research Commission, and I've been asked to give an overview on the water situation, water and sanitation for that matter. But before we start, because we're going to give advice to the government of national unity, but one aspect that's what's the advice to ourselves as users, each of us. So if I start with this room, how many of you know what's your daily water use like? What's the quantity? So if I go around the room, do you know? Are you being saving water, or are you being wasteful? So I think we need to, because that's part of the root cause. Because what we are doing is that we want to be wasteful, and then we start to project government must do this, government must do this. But the root cause is it's us. We are the users. But what's in terms of water, and we all live through this on a daily basis. So the next question that I might ask is that for the last week, how many of you had a water disruption? Maybe just a show of hands quickly. And again, and do you know what's the cause of that? Because all our dams are full. So we can't say it's climate change. Something is happening, etc. So there's enough water in the system. I think most of our systems are almost at 100%. So there's a layer to this cake that is much more than climate change. And what is that? And I think the report deals with it very well in saying, but how do we manage? How do we start to manage this uncertainty? Is the model through which we are managing our resources the right one? Long-term 5-10-year plans, whereas your pendulum of your extreme events are swinging. If you look at Cape Town at the moment, it's swinging all over the place, and we don't know even if this pendulum is swung to the top, because that's part of the uncertainty. But what we've seen in less than a decade, this thing has swung from droughts to floods, etc., and it confuses people. Okay, because people see when it floods, there must be water. But the floods means there might be less water because we're not capturing that water. Okay, so part of this. So maybe just to remind us, in terms of um, the situation in water. So water is to adaptation what energy is to mitigation. Just think about it. Water is to adaptation what energy is to mitigation. And a lot of the debates currently in the country is around mitigation, isn't it? And we can even see, and the report goes further, that says 81% of the funding is going to mitigation, 12% of it is going to adaptation. So it seemed to be more, how do we decarbonize? How do we get into the energy? But again, how are we spending money to not just adaptation, but to develop this adaptive capacity for these climate tantrums that we are experiencing. And of course, as I've mentioned, there are other drivers, not just climate change or weather variability between seasons, etc. Furthermore, our water situation is that 98% of our freshwater resources has already been allocated. Just think about it. So what we need to do, and what the report then does, is that how do we start allocate it better? How are we getting more efficiency into the system, etc.? And this is the advice to government. But as I said earlier, what's your advice? What's your contribution to that? Because it's not just then again, on top of that, we have a pollution problem, especially a microbiology pollution problem. And this is not just what you've often hear in the news from wastewater, because it's something that you can put in the camera in, but there's also agricultural runoff. There's all sorts of other non-points pollution that's not getting the attention that it requires. Because if we fix all the wastewater problems, pollution will still be there. So where is it coming from? Of course, we then need to, and then climate change is then likely to worsen our quantity and quality issues over time. And then we see this a major other concern, not related to climate change, but that needs to be dealt with, is theft and vandalism of infrastructure. I think for people operating these schemes, that's the number one things. Climate change is way down the list, because when they wake up in the morning, the pipes and the valves are gone. Okay, and then those type of things. So if we look, for example, at the realized climate change impact, so if we think about what's happening in Cape Town, if we think of the KZN floods, if we think about the Eastern Cape situation as well, is that we have now these compound hazards occurring. So they're occurring on top of each other, different hazards at the same time, etc., which then requires some of the shifts. And part of the shifts that the reports advocate, and it's about how do we strengthen, how do we accelerate, and how do we create these new shifts. It's around adaptive management. How do we develop that adaptive capacity within our municipalities, within our managers? But if you have, I need to plan, and the age is going to come, and those type of things, and you can't quickly pivot into a new direction, it's a problem. And I think it's something that we need to, because managing uncertainty is much more difficult and complex than managing certainty. And I think this is, and I think the report makes this well, because in South Africa, most of our water laws has in them the issue of integrated water resource management. Okay. So, and again, how do we manage things in an integrated way across sectors, within the sector, etc. And the other part of the report is around different spheres of government, because this is where I think the bulk of the problem is. We can, as I said, our dams are full, our utilities are doing the maintenance to get it to municipalities, but once it crosses the municipal meter into the municipalities, where the problem starts. And this is part of the part of the shifts that we need to do in the efficiency is around our non-revenue water losses is high, 47%. So what it means is whatever we treat and goes through the system, 47% of that is either leaking, not being paid for, or unaccounted for. Just think about that number. So if 100 liters, 47 liters, I'm not getting paid for, etc., etc. So think about the energy that's going into that. Think about the chemicals that's going into that. And I think that is part of the problem and part of the the recommendation is on how do we improve billing, metering, and collection. And I think that is part, because we also have a principle of the user pay. If someone is not paying, where's the money going to come from? Which then leads to how do we operate and maintain these type of things. So, and again, what's your experience? So I'm trying to connect us to water. How many of you, when you drove here, saw the local council lifting the manhole covers on the stormwater system in preparation for a wetter summer, as some of the models suggest? How many of you seen teams out on the roads doing that? None. And that is the problem, because what's going to happen? High rainfall, systems are blocked, it floods, and then we say it's climate change. It's not necessarily that it's a combination, but it means that the operation and maintenance of our systems is not ready, and that's a management problem. And I think when you go to the municipality, is that they'll say there's no money. So they talk. So now we need to start thinking about what's the investments going into some of these services and into the municipality and operating. But what I would suggest is, if you live in a ward, call your council and say, hey, I'm not seeing any teams doing this, but because I'm affected by this flooding when it happens, okay? Because we know that this needs to then the issue around monitoring needs to be improved. So good decision is based on good data and information. And we know that our monitoring systems have been declining over time. We know that it's a huge problem. Integrating gray and blue and green infrastructure to enhance water quality and to regulate flows. Not just thinking about an engineered gray infrastructure approach, but rather how do we use nature, etc., etc. Yeah. So, and then we have what I would like to call the issue of tyranny of place. Because in the urban centers, much better than what when you go out into the rural spaces. So, and I think it relates to some of the issues. The maintenance of aging and aged infrastructure. So our Sinner Water is not talking, we used to say aging infrastructure. We now say it's aged. It has reached that point where we need now to really, and then investments going into that up until 20, let me just check my notes. It's about just above 7 trillion rand that we need in the next few decades to look at and to fix some of these systems. So again, part of the shift is how do we start to decentralize some of these services? Because when we think of water in the urban space, we think about bulk, what's coming from the Vaal system. We complain about Lesotho, but people living in the rural do not have access to bulk infrastructure or these vast pipelines. So they need to use things. So again, the ambition is to that's that shift. And the yeah, so I will not go into, but there's some of the clear barriers is incoherent policies, and I think Melissa alluded to that. Weak governance structures across inter and intra government, insufficient finances, inconsistent actions by government and stakeholders. Vandalism and theft I've mentioned, it's something that keeps on coming. And then the uptake of technologies and innovation. This is where I come from. It's very slow. And often the procurement is not understood. If I have an innovation, it's only one innovative idea, but someone will ask you for 3 quotes. So it's the part, and it's not something that cannot be done. People just don't know how to do it. And again, for example, where I come from, we've developed toilets that flushes on 3 liters of water. Your typical system is between 8 and 13 liters. How many of you can have access to that? Have you seen it in your hardware stores, etc.? So uptake of that is so yeah. So some of the key messages from myself is that we need to digitize to get that information and things. So and information, we need to decarbonize. Although water is not a huge problem in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and then we need to decentralize more. So with that, thank you, Melissa.
Thanks. Thank you so much to my fellow commissioners for championing this report. I see there's some other commissioners also joined us. And as commissioners, we now take this report, we present it to stakeholders and the public, but we also take it to our constituencies to socialize the findings, try to really get people to engage with that. And we ask you to join us in that process and do that in the field that you work in as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, commissioners. That was an amazing panel. I'm now going to call on the next set of panelists, so you're welcome to give you. So if those sitting on panel 2 can please join us on stage. Boitumelo, Tuli, Dora, Thomas, and Anna. So thank you for joining us, panelists. So we've invited people for this particular panel that have and continue to work with the PCC on various aspects of our mandate. And we want here to have a conversation around the content, structure, and findings of this report. The report has not always made explicit recommendations, but that doesn't mean we can't be circumspect on the findings of what the report has said. And to provide some thoughts, either their particular thoughts or thoughts coming from their specific constituencies, we've brought together a group of experts. So firstly, we have Boitumelo Molete in the pink. Boitumelo is the Social Development Policy Coordinator and co-lead on climate change and just transition in the policy unit at COSATU. She is an advisor and board member on many organizations, including the United Nations Environmental Programme, UNESCO, and African Women in Energy and Power, Just Energy Transition Advisory Board member. She also, and that's just to name a few, Boitumelo also served as a technical and strategic representative for Labour at many COPs and other UNFCCC events. Then we've got Tuli Bona, or Tuli as she likes to be called, Mshlanga. She's a special projects manager in the Fiscal and Economic Policy Unit at BUSA, Business Unity South Africa. She says she's a passionate public servant at heart, which I like, with a drive to pursue change in South Africa and globally. She is a public policy specialist and researcher with over 10 years experience in various organizations, including ENCA, the Mail and Guardian, and the Association for Black Securities and Investment Professionals. She also serves on numerous advisory boards in many organizations. Dora Marema is the portfolio head. Dora, if you can just, Municipal Sustainability at the South African Local Government Association, or SALGA. She's been involved in issues of sustainability since 2000 and worked with a wide range of multi-stakeholders in various sectors, including small-scale agriculture, environment, climate change, and renewable energy. Importantly, she brings in the gender aspect as well, and land rights at local, national, and international levels. She also founded Gender CC Southern Africa, Women for Climate Justice, and co-founded the Green Business College. Then we have Dr. Anna Taylor. Dr. Taylor is a research fellow with the University of Cape Town in the Climate and Development Initiative. Trained in environmental science and urban studies, her work focuses on processes of adapting to climate risks, especially droughts and floods in African cities. She engages in transdisciplinary approaches to foster diversity and inclusion in producing knowledge for reducing climate risks and building a more equitable resilience. She's been working with the PCC for a long time on developing approaches to navigating climate resilient development pathways across municipalities. And then last but not least, we have Thomas Nguni from Groundwork. He's an activist, particularly in the Mpumalanga area, and he's one of the founders of the Greater Middleburg Residents Associations, which focuses on service delivery and socio-economic issues. He was also a founding member of the Freedom of Expression Network, which works closely with the Freedom of Expression Institute, which aims to protect abuse, arrest, and other human rights, particularly during protests. And in 2015, he also co-founded the Highveld Environmental Justice Network. And he's been working closely with the PCC on projects in Mpumalanga and particularly Komati. So that's our esteemed colleagues in this panel. So I'm going to start off by asking a few questions. So my first question is to Boitumelo. This report has shown national support for climate action and a just transition. It further places responsibility on government to ensure a just transition. What, in your view, is the evolving role of labor in the just transition, and what support is still required to ensure minimal impacts on workers in this process?
Sure. Thank you very much, Yuri. Good morning, colleagues. I think just to have a bit of framing, I mean, the just transition is a priority for organized labor. There's no just transition without workers. And we need to be clear that the inclusion and consideration of workers when discussing the just transition is very important. The report was very thin on the role that organized labor is very thin on what organized labor has done thus far on the just transition. You see mention in the report of business and civil society alongside government as core constituencies that have contributed to the active lobbying of a just transition that is inclusive. However, I think we need to note that, I mean, the 2022 and 2023, as well as the 2024 organized labor, NEDLAC organized labor school was very clear. The just transition is a priority for not just COSATU, but the entire organization, federations that are at NEDLAC. That means that this is on the agenda, on the national agenda, and we need to be considerate and identify that organized labor has been clearly articulate in the just transition. COSATU has a document as far as 2011, which was adopted at Congress, identifying the just transition as a core agenda of the trade union movement. We have the blueprint of 2022 speaking specifically to the just transition, as well as now recently developed toolkits for workers on just transition, focusing on youth, gender, as well as just empowering educators and organizers. And I think I wanted to have that framing first to indicate that there is work being done by organized labor, which the report failed to make reference to, which is a bit problematic on our end because we are working the ground, but also trying to influence policy going forward in the just transition. So the mention of government, business, and civil society only sidelining, and I don't want to use harsh words, it's a bit sidelining. And I think it's going to be important that the PCC, through its work, identify that there is actual work being done. It's important that this be linked to the national discussion and agenda. And going forward, that should be considered. Also, just that the just transition agenda should be a national agenda. And COSATU has been clear on that. Government should be at the forefront to enable the just transition, to enable an environment that is conducive for all stakeholders to participate in the just transition. Government should be holding social dialogue, very key to this just transition. I know that a lot of the times there are consultations that are being done, but as far as COSATU is concerned, they haven't been really inclusive. They haven't touched the people that it should touch. Hosting an online webinar and saying that is consultation is really a demeaning part that would be yeah, it's very demeaning to people that are working in the space, but also the people that are going to be affected going forward. So putting that principle of social dialogue and it being a priority for government and the PCC as an advisor to make sure that that is facilitated in a way that is going to be beneficial to the entire discussion. We speak about transparency, and sometimes it's not really acknowledged how important it is to be transparent, just transparent throughout the process. From the time of discussing the framework, I'll acknowledge that the PCC was very open to consultations then. But it's very important that consultation is done and it's done in a transparent manner so that details are being given to constituencies as and when things transpire. This also includes finance. We would make reference as COSATU to the JET IP, which we've submitted our comments to the PCC in relation to it not being inclusive of what organized labor would have thought of. So yeah, I think the just transition should really be a national strategy. All departments should be consolidated into having one messaging for all constituencies and for South Africa. And the presidency alongside the PCC and the PMU need to follow the same strategy and need to follow the same agenda for South Africa so that we're able to articulate a just transition that is going to be developmental in nature and assist South Africans, especially workers and those vulnerable in communities that are really going to be impacted by the just transition. I think the departments that are relevant to this discussion, environmental affairs, minerals and petroleum, electricity, as well as DHEADS, because we speak a lot about skills, need to be working in collaboration so we're able to have a discussion that moves the agenda forward. And I think, I mean, the play a role in ensuring that is PCC as the advisory body to the presidency, I think should take that into serious importance to allow for political heads and DGs to be able to have one voice when speaking to the just transition, because at this stage things are very fragmented and the messaging is different. So the role of government is to consolidate all of that and ensure that we have that agenda that moves things forward. Yeah, that alignment is very important with clear messaging. I think just to conclude, Yuri, it's important that there are actual industrial policies, labor market policies, as well as social policies that are going to be able to guide the just transition and how it is we're going to be implementing the just transition as South Africa. And when it comes to implementing, the issue of skills needs to be prioritized. I don't want to lament on a lot of comments that we've done as COSATU, but it's going to be important that the state realizes its role and the importance of workers, the current and the future, as well as the importance of investing in skills, because organized labor believes that skills are an enabler to the just transition discourse, which will accommodate workers going forward in the future. So yeah, that I think Yuri, just to emphasize that the just transition cannot just be a project, and we need to have a national agenda that we move forward. And I think the state of climate action in South Africa report is a great start to being able to tie down what we've been doing and where we're going as a national strategy to achieve a just, inclusive transition. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Boitumelo. And I think we can actually thank COSATU for a common almost definition of the just transition, which we used widely in our just transition framework. I do have a quick follow-up question for you. Do you have any advice for almost, I mean, we have been doing this for a while, but in terms of consensus building and having sort of a common messaging, you know, across all platforms as a country, when there are differences in opinions on what a just transition means for labor and communities and other sort of relevant stakeholders who feel that they are being undermined or not represented, what is your opinion on that?
Firstly, Yuri, South Africa has a great social dialogue body called Netlac, and that is where we all bring together our ideas, but also are able to either concede or note that we have those challenges in finding each other. And the role of Netlac is to make sure that all constituencies are represented and their voices are heard. There won't be a clear cut position that we will all agree to. But I think it's going to be important for us to allow for the process to take place, to allow for the discussion and inputs to be captured in a way that will be able to then be translated into a national strategy. And the PCC has done it with the framework. There were quite a number of heavy discussions that were done when it was consolidated. But to be able to do that, we need to allow for the discussion to take place, and we need to approach it in a manner that is very clear that this is for South Africa's development, as opposed to it just being a labor project or a business project. So consensus is built through social dialogue that needs to be considered and continuous. I think consulting people adequately means that you don't go and present this long scientific document and want them to respond to it. You have to make sure that the conversation is able to take place.
Thanks so much. There's a lot more to unpack there, but I'm going to move on now to Dora. Dora, the report is very vocal on the challenges faced by local government, particularly in terms of financial support. Can the state and the private to financial support, that is, and does the support differ for different types of local government departments or metros, local municipalities and district municipalities?
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Yuri, for this opportunity. I think the mayor in her input did indicate, I think, the extent of the challenges that have been highlighted by the report, and I think we are excited that this is a start in terms of at least being on the same page as far as the challenges that municipalities are facing. They are very important because I think, as you have said in the report, they are the frontliners in terms of climate change impact. But again, they are a place where policy meets with service delivery, where it meets with all kind of poverty, unemployment, and the likes. And I think we need coordinated kind of support. I think a lot of support that has been provided has been piecemeal, fragmented, various partners coming to provide support, and that frustrates municipalities on the other end, purely because that is not being met by capacity at the municipal level. So what you are seeing is that there is no institutionalization of that support. So that when the support ends, municipalities almost go back to where they were. So what we would like to see is, I think, from all levels of government, we need to coordinate the kind of support. But again, support needs to be provided to municipalities while municipalities are taking leadership of the process. So stay clear of developing programs and support programs that are not informed by municipalities. And I think, further in your question, you're asking me, is the support the same? It's not. We've got different categories of municipalities. When you think about metros, who are the centers of our economy, a lot of the projects there, you'll be looking at massive waste to energy projects, and then in those kind of things, huge renewable energy projects. But when you talk about a smaller municipality, you are talking about small mini grids projects. You are talking about a lot of work that would be focused on building resilience, climate resilience, very much kind of adaptation focused type of interventions. And I think support must be fit for purpose. It must be responding to the kind of needs that municipalities are facing. And that then speaks to the support around the technical capacity that municipalities are looking for to collect the relevant data, to conduct risk and vulnerability assessments that should inform how the municipalities will have to respond. And one of the key things is this notion of strengthening our own institutions. We have opportunities, I think, with the just transition in terms of the resources that we'll be able to generate. And I think we again stay clear of the temptation to go and develop projects that needs to be saving municipalities, use that as an opportunity to strengthen. I think we have got huge structural challenges that municipalities are facing. One of them is the issue around funding for local government. You know, you read that we're still sitting at 9.9% fiscus that is going to local government, and at the bulk of that. And I think we are excited, having heard what the president said in his speech around we need to get the funding model for local government right. And I think with that, and with all of this, now the climate change bill being a law, and it stipulates that the minister, together with the Minister of Treasury and the three spheres of government, need to come up with a mechanism for funding the climate change response. It provides us with an opportunity to look at how do we envision kind of financial support that we and I think it's not to say that there aren't other challenges that are not necessarily funding related. There are issues. The government internally has to self-reflect and look at ways to be able to transform itself. But that has to be met with a conducive funding environment that allows municipalities to do. If you look at the Climate Change Act, it stipulates what metros and districts would have to do. And that kind of stuff gives me anxiety. Knowing the capacity at many of our municipalities. Of course, we have seen a huge move on the metros who have started to work on the climate action plans. And the same is trickling into the next level, which is the intermediate cities. But when you look at smaller municipalities, there is a challenge there. And districts are then tasked with a huge responsibility to be able to work with their locals to build the capacity that is needed, assist them to collect the relevant data that will inform the actions that are taken. So there is a role. There is a role also for the private sector to partner with local government on many of the solutions that are required on innovation, public-private partnerships that are going to look at some of the ways in which we could build disaster resilience, collecting data, using technology. We have seen our municipalities being devastated by disasters and not being able to cope. And as they are trying to rebuild, another disaster comes, and it's purely because we are not prepared from understanding our vulnerabilities and directing the resources and the support that comes to those areas to limit the necessary loss of life and destruction of infrastructure that we are witnessing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Because in my mind, a lot of the adaptation and resilience competencies are already, a focus of local government. Something like water, wastewater treatment. It's part of, adaptation and so forth. But if you don't have the resources to do even the basics. But I have a very quick follow-up question. And that is, in terms of governance issues, what support does local government need in terms of ironing out those governance, systemic, structural issues that the report has identified?
I think there are various processes that are currently underway to look at those recurrent governance issues. But again, I think one of the most important thing is I always say that we should not leave the political leadership of local government behind when we talk about these issues. There is temptation to always work with the technocrats, work with the officials whom I believe are really getting this. But when we leave the people who form council that has to approve or adopt a climate change response plan, then we are not going to be able to move. Who are going to have to receive a presentation on an innovative project that is going to focus on water reuse for a municipality that is already struggling with drought, then we are really missing something, because they are usually not in the room. They do not understand even why. I mean, right now, the issue of the just energy transition is a concept that is out there. And I always say that we need to connect it to the reason why we even have to transition when we come to local government. We talk about socializing these concepts purely because that conversation needs to be had. that we are facing these challenges that manifest in various ways, in the droughts, in the floods that you are seeing, in all these tornadoes and all of these things, that the world is responding. And South Africa is a signatory to conventions like the Paris Agreement. And that means that we all have to move, that there are transitions that have to be made and investments that have to be made in line with that response. So that when there's support, when we've got stakeholders and partners coming to assist municipalities, that there is a buy-in in the whole of the institution of a municipality. That will also assist in making sure that the support is actually institutionalized. That is not coming from outside and it remains there, but it's being owned, and the interventions are integrated into the IDP and then budgeted for, so that the work can continue even after the intervention has been.
I mean, we can have a whole broader discussion on IDPs and also building resilience, because you're talking about disasters and then rebuilding. Are those actually built in a resilient fashion? And the answer might be no, quite often. But we move on to Thuli. The report has highlighted specific roles that the private sector in climate action and in just transition can play. How high is the just transition on the list of priorities for business or the private sector? And where do you think companies can make the most meaningful impact?
So I think, Dora has probably exhausted some of those options for us. But I mean, I think it goes without saying, right? We have bought into the Paris Agreement. We're also members of the ILO. So just to mention a few things that at least signal that business is committed to the, first of all, climate action that then forms part of the just transition agenda. So I know that some of my colleagues here, especially labor and community, would argue otherwise, that at least business is taking this issue quite seriously. But we are. And we've really seen a shift in the approach in which we do business, because previously we've been seen to have a very myopic approach to business. But we see more and more that a lot of our members, at least as WUSA and as organized business, that they are moving towards integrating sustainability into their strategies and ESG considerations into, their philosophy, their investment philosophies, but also appointing the right boards with the right acumen, with an understanding of ESG. So obviously this then trickles down to everyday business operations, and we're really happy with that. And we will report what has really come out from this report is need a very considered approach from everyone, and it's just not about what business is doing. And for me, I think it is important that we accelerate the approach that we are taking towards climate action, not just just transition. And it is important for us to do this because it has an impact on not just us as business, on our profits, on our bottom lines. I know all the time that businesses very seem to be quite selfish. Not operate in a vacuum. We operate within community. So it would be disingenuous for us to actually like to consider the impact of our decisions on those communities. So therefore, I think it is important for us to, think about what is it that we've been doing. I think a lot of the listed companies have really been taking quite a lead on, climate-related disclosures. So that's just some of the measures that we've taken over time. And I think our long-term view is that we do need to take responsibility and implementing the appropriate responses to climate change where necessary. So I think more than anything, we do need to have a broader conversation as social partners, beyond just Exaro, beyond just Sasol, beyond just coal and oil and gas.
and really move towards centering the conversation around communities, and because these are the people that feel the brunt. And it cannot be obviously business as usual. We are more and more seeing unprecedented extreme weather patterns. The recent case in Limpopo, we know that in KZN, there's always reports around floods. And so this for us means that we need to think about what happens if those businesses are wiped off completely, the impact of that on the economy, what does that do to everyday business, the impact it has on insurance companies, retail, agriculture, construction, manufacturing. I mean, we do know that some of these businesses are still reeling from some of these impacts. So we do get shocked all the time, of course, as South Africans, but it is a reminder that we cannot obviously move as we normally move, even in our everyday, activities as business. So I know that our natural posture as we think about climate change and this just transition narrative is that we always think about the shift from dirty industries to clean cleaner, greener energies, which is quite good. I mean, I think that's the base, but it is beyond that. It's about growing the economy, creating those jobs, and upskilling the workers, and obviously planning for a climate resilient economy, as it were, as you said. And for me, I think the low hanging fruits would be for us to invest in skills. There was a report that was released by the Department of Science and Technology that spoke about the skills that we need for a green economy. And so it's important for us as business to be looking at how do we then partner, as Dora said, actually it was, I think it was Label, who talked about our collaboration with, higher learning institutions and communities as well. How do we upskill them? How do we make them adequately prepared for all of these climate-related disasters that they face every day? And so it is important for us then to look at how much are we investing in research and development that speaks to the innovation and the technology that we need to respond to these crises on an everyday basis. But most importantly, and it speaks to what social partners do at NetLec, which I'm not quite sure if we do it to the extent to which the impact does filter through to everyday lives, is that we need to have a discussion about a social cohesion around this just transition. Because if we move without having social cohesion, then it does mean we leave a lot of people behind, right? And we always talk about how this just transition must be underpinned by justice, but we don't actually take into consideration if we do actually understand this, from an ordinary perspective. And I know that the survey that you guys did say that South Africans buy into the just transition, which is good. But do they understand how it will apply on an everyday basis? So as business, we're quite excited that this is a base. We do not say that we've done enough. There's more we can do. There's more we can actually push in our boardrooms and, of course, on the bottom line. But I think we begin to think about how will those businesses be sustained. I want to borrow a term on sustainable development, that you want to address the needs of the current without stealing from the needs of the future. So if we are talking about skills development and we are looking at how to empower the younger population who will inherit most of these problems that we are creating today, we obviously need to talk about how we then integrate this from a basic question, and they enables us to sit and say, does the policy that we have in place respond to the current needs of what society is facing around the crisis of climate change?
Yeah, thanks so much, Julia. I think it's really encouraging. I think for the previous few decades, ESG was seen as an add-on or philanthropy. And it's good to see that it's being more mainstreamed, and it's both bottom up and top down, so that it's impacting the work of various levels, in the private sector. And I think there is a discussion to be had, because you make an important point. There's strong sort of engagement with SASL, with ESCOM, and the bigger communities. And how do we reach sort of those, the companies that are just below that, for lack of a better term? But we're fast running out of time. And I do want to chat to Anna and Thomas as well. So Anna, this report has made implicit recommendations, but also it identifies gaps in information and research, which, if filled, I think could improve climate action in the country. So how useful do you think the report is or can be in guiding future research?
Thanks, Yuri, and good day, colleagues. Yeah, it's wonderful to hear, I think, the resonances between what many speakers have mentioned already. So I think it seems to be broad agreement with the report sort of headline findings that we strong on commitment, and it sounds like most of us stand by that commitment, but that, you know, the scale and pace of implementation is still lagging. But I think what we also all are acknowledging is this amazing major uptick in climate-related activity, particularly over the last 5 years, I would say. Unfortunately, that partly is due to these recurring extreme events that have left no part of the country untouched. So part of it is reacting to those experiences.
Can you just lift your mic a little bit up because you're breaking? Yeah, thanks.
Sorry about that. Is that a little bit better? Yeah. So this uptick of activity, partly sparked by experiencing these events, but then also sparked by the incredible efforts of many people in the room. So I think many organizations and individuals represented here across all the constituencies have really been the engines of that activity. And the report does reflect some of that. Maybe not yet in the granularity that we would like to see, but I think those headline messages are coming through. And I think what the report asks us to do is ask this question: how can we build on that uptick of activity, but better cohere amongst ourselves so that we can really reach that positive tipping point towards climate resilient development that we all want to see as our collective future. So the report definitely does highlight maybe where some more research is needed, but I think also importantly it highlights how we need to get better at mobilizing the evidence and knowledge that we do have into action. So that connection between knowledge and action, really strengthening that. And partly that is this point that's already been made numerous times around skilling and training. So part of that is, you know, really new, improved, targeted training offerings that provide what municipal officials need, what local councillors need, what spatial planners, entrepreneurs, water managers need to be at the top of their game and to do the basics better and innovate in all of the spaces that they work. So, I mean, just two examples, maybe building off what we've heard already, and then maybe pushing the second example, pushing the agenda a little bit further. So more research around better ways to really integrate the maintenance and upgrading of grey, green, and blue infrastructure. So that's, you know, how do we make sure that we're looking after our wetlands and our drainage canals and our wastewater treatment works so that they work well in conjunction to make sure that we're enhancing stream flows into our dams that we rely on in dry years and recharging the aquifers that we increasingly rely on as a sort of backup supply in some areas, I mean, as a primary supply in others. So really making sure that those strategic water source areas are equipped with, you know, the best knowledge and evidence to target action and supporting the constitution and good functioning of catchment management agencies, those sorts of things. So I think there's a lot of research needed to continue supporting that. And then another example might be pushing the mitigation agenda a little bit in innovation around materials design. So we know, we've heard a bit about energy and transport. The other big emission sector is the construction industry when construction is fueled by concrete. And so research around innovating in materials that are less carbon intensive, but also more heat resistant, because we know that's a mounting stress that we face. So how can we innovate in that kind of construction material space, both for the formal and informal economies that are building the cities and towns that we all live in? So maybe I'll pause there, but as an example of where we're really seeing opportunity to leverage what we already know and build further.
Yeah. Thanks, Anna. As I say, we are running out of time, but I think as a follow-up, we need to have a conversation also on almost the dichotomy between the sort of environmental side of water management and then the service delivery side of water management. So ensuring that sort of ward committees and catchment management committees are engaging at a local level and they're speaking with one voice, because water isn't an infinite resource and management needs to be coherent across both of these. Thomas, you have the longest question, so you have to pay attention. This report states that although decreasing, a handful of key industrial players continue to command much of the resource development and distribution and political discourse and political influence in South Africa. And that despite the PCC and other government efforts to be more inclusive of stakeholders, private corporations have had more say in the nature and pace of change, whereas affected communities and civil society voices are often sidelined. Do you agree with these findings? And how can the PCC in particular, but also the state and non-state actors, support civil society to allow these organizations to be more impactful in their work, particularly around and particularly work of communities?
Thanks. So I think for me, what is important is part of the just transition should seek to address the legacy well of apartheid and unfortunately the current government, because I think ordinary people have been viewed only as consumers. So the language, and this is the language which we've inherited from the mineral energy complex, wherein we just want to extract, and then through the extraction process, we assume that we will create jobs and then for people can live. We never played a meaningful role in terms of decision making. We never played a meaningful role in terms of ownership. But then all we know is that there's a lot of discussion between government and industry behind our backs, and that's not even public. And that speaks to whether this current process, is it transparent enough? Are these discussions reflective of all the stakeholders in our society, or are we just playing games? So for me, I think it's very important for us to note that. But it's quite interesting, because now if you ask that question, we also have to ask the different roles we need to play. What is the role of local government? What is the role of civil society? What is the role of business? And then you begin to see, do we have a clear policy which we could use to encourage civil society to be involved? Currently, no. In fact, even at an intergovernmental level, I would say this report was very diplomatic, saying there's policy incoherence. They can't speak to each other. There are not enough intergovernmental relations. I mean, we cannot beat up by the bush and say policy incoherence. If you look into our national development contributions, they say one thing, and then you look into IRP 2023, it's completely different. It shows that somebody is not talking to someone. So I think this is where we need to start, because when we go and say we want people to be informed, and people must inform the overall decision making, we cannot be seated with two departments that cannot speak the same language. It's confusing, and it's going to create conflicts within our society. But again, if you look into the entire document, look into agriculture. We're still talking about climate resilient seeds. It's pure commercial language. We are not looking into how do we reshape the food system. How do we make sure that we don't track our food to Joburg, but we get local Joburg people producing the food, because that speaks to how we'll reduce our carbon emissions. But the language we're using here is still commercial. So it tells you the influence of business. Even in this final report, we're still talking commercial agriculture. We make mention of small-scale agriculture, but then we want to commercialize the sector. And if we commercialize the sector, that alone will lead, unfortunately, to the 1913 land dispossession. People will be displaced. We've seen how people are being displaced by mining, energy, and agriculture in the current context, in the current commercial context, will dispossess people of their own land. So there's nothing mentioned about social ownership in the overall report. We need to think, how do we promote social ownership? How do we form partnerships between local government and communities so that we begin to cut that systemic bond between corporate and business, and government, because we know it's there. So as much as communities are mentioned here, we need to acknowledge, just like labor, our role in terms of influencing the overall decision making is still minimal. We need to improve on that. There's no compromise on that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Thomas. That is sobering, but still an important point to make. I think it's important to note that the report does touch on sort of the different competencies between, different state, and it makes specific reference to the IRP and our NDC, which is, up for revision soon. Thomas, I think the PCC has been grappling with trying to operationalize the justice elements that are raised in the just transition framework, particularly the procedural justice element. And that involves labor, but to a great extent, communities. And I think we're also battling with ensuring that the right people are in the room, for a lack of a better word, to ensure women are in the room, for example, actual communities in the room, because we often find sometimes that we have a representative, or what we think is a representative of the community, but might not have been appointed by the community. So do you have any advice on how engagement can be improved to try and meet that aspect of procedural justice?
Look, it's difficult to say what, but I think we need to be open. We need to recognize all community-based organizations. I think in the past, we made an assumption that what committees generally represent the community. And we know, and we all realize that what committees are politically aligned, and therefore there was a great opportunity that they might not be talking to other community members. And I think currently, I know myself and Dr. Victor Monique, who's not here now, are trying to work on a template which will make sure that engagement is inclusive of all the stakeholders. And part of that is, one, recognizing the structures or the institutions that we have within the system, understanding how they work, but also ensuring that we bring other forums on board so that those institutions cannot exclude other community formations. So I think for me, that's the first aspect. Secondly, guys, I think this it's like kind of, to me, becoming boring, because for us to promote accountability and fight corruption, we need to be transparent. There is no way we can hide information and say we want to be transparent. We need to be transparent. We need to make sure that information is available in public portals. I mean, we were complaining about what do we mean by engagement. Does going online mean we are consulting? No, because we know our challenge in terms of technology. Now, if we hold our sessions online, we're excluding people, which means the information which is meant for the greater good of the community does not reach them. We need to support civil society movements. We cannot just say local government, but we also need to support civil society movements so that we can expand the information we say we want to share, so that we can expand the level of engagement at community level. But now, if we take all the resources, and this is the unfortunate part, and it's also happening within the PCC, most of the resources are being absorbed by consultants. But those consultants, when they most money, so they can't do it. Now we need to rethink that approach to say, how do we empower civil society organizations so that they can lead these discussions in their own communities and inform the dialogue at a certain level. So I think for me that's very critical.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Anna, I want to just turn to you. I'm going to give you two comments. Sorry, I put someone. I'm going to give you 2 minutes just to comment on this follow-up question. How effective do you think this report will be in not just tracking but affecting change using the almost implied recommendations?
I think the report.
You need to use your mic.
I think the report gives us a very useful baseline to work from. It gives us a more coherent narrative than maybe we've had before. And I think the challenge then is we're going to need, it's quite a dense report because it needs to be to build that coherence. So in order to then take that into our learning for action, I think we're going to need to make it easy, and it talks to the point about readily available evidence that sits behind this report so that people can slice it and dice it and look at it in different ways, to sort of scratch below the surface of the big narrative, which provides a very useful starting point, to be able to interrogate it, but then to also be able to build on it and fill gaps and get into that more granular detail based on actions that are happening in many quarters that can then feed into the cycle as we try and produce an updated version every 2 years. So I think it gives us a really great starting point. And then just as an example, I mean, I think one of the things we need more of for the next iteration is for example, tracking the type and number and location of what we might call climate positive jobs. So the report gives us a number of, 150 to 200,000 jobs in the coal value chain that, might come under risk as we progress through this transition. We need to be able to put alongside that the numbers around the jobs that are available to replace some of those opportunities. And some of them don't exist yet, but some of them do exist, but we haven't been able to, I think, yet give the data that helps people imagine what that alternative livelihood trajectory, career track looks like. So I think that's one example where the report helps us identify that's something where we need to build that evidence base out more. And then just to pick up, the report mentions, for example, innovations around climate budget tagging that Treasury's been involved in rolling out in various places. I think building on that climate budget tagging work so that we can also put numbers to actually the spend that we are already making as part of the core mandates of municipalities, so that we can then show that actually a lot of money is already from our core budgets are being spent on things that do help us build climate resilience. And we can make the case then that that we've got the capacity to spend, to absorb the kind of money that we're asking to be added to that pot. So I think, it gives us a really great starting point, and it points us to where we need more granular evidence to build off as we out to build on a lot of good stuff that's already happening.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks, Anna. So I think this panel was important in 2 ways. Firstly, to reflect on the findings of the report, what we've done wrong or gaps in the report, but it's also going to direct some of the work of the PCC and government in the coming months, coming years, and then the lead up to the next report where we, can deal with those missing issues. So thank you very much to the panel. We really appreciate you being here. Can we have a round of applause for them? And I now hand back to Blessing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Yuri, and to the initial panelists of the commissioners as well as the panel of civil society and stakeholders. We are almost at the end of the program, except the moment that we all want to record in history so that no one ever chickens out. I want to take this opportunity to call back on stage, and I know that it's a small stage, but I want to call the Deputy Chairperson of the Commission, Mr. Vali Musa, the Director General of Environment, Nomfundo, as well as the commissioners, Princess Takadu, please on stage, Mayor Pukunzi, Shafiq, Jacques, to formally hand over the report to the Director General, as well as the Executive Director, because you must ultimately make sure that every day you look into the report and say, is recommendation one going to government? No. Commissioner Yawich. As Commissioner for anchoring the working group, Commissioner Mbodi, Commissioner Shabalal. No, we must do that so that the commissioners must not come and say there was no consensus on the report. So the more commissioners are here handing it over. You know, as the photographers line them up, I must say that even when we were handing over the Just Transition Framework itself, we did not have so many commissioners. So I'm not sure whether the positive stories are more or less important than the negative stories. Well, ladies and gentlemen, now I'll call upon the Deputy Chair to formally hand over the report to DG Shabalala to make sure that it reaches the highest echelons of government. And in the same vein, the commissioners will take them to their constituencies, and the Secretariat will continue to watch it to make sure that at every step of our action and our interaction, we reflect on it and continue to measure whether our actions are really responding to the implicit recommendations. But I think that they're explicit because they show us the danger signs. Thank you very much. I'll call upon DG Chabalala to make the remarks on behalf of government. DG.
Thank you very much. Am I audible? Yes. Okay. No, thank you very much to the program director. I must say this session has had very interesting inputs coming from government when the panels were making their input, firstly from the commissioners, taking us through the various aspects of the report. It's a very long report, and them looking into the various sectors that have been highlighted as sectors that really requires attention. I think as government, we are already looking into how then do we align, and of interest is that when you look into our sets, which is the sectoral emissions targets, there is already a convergence of some of the sectors, which already begins to highlight the actual areas of focus which needs to be prioritized. But the last panel for me was really very interesting. Very good inputs. And it begins to say, are we really taking everyone along with us? And as government standing here, I am slowly digesting to say there's a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot that needs us. I know that, Joanne, the word mainstreaming, you said you don't like. And I'm beginning to understand that, to say that we need to begin to bring society with us. What does this mean on a day-to-day? I think you have, Commissioner, asked us, do we know how much water are utilizing a day? But we need to start as government, standing as government, to be able to work together. There must be that coherence. There must be that string line across government in terms of the messages that comes across. And I think those are some of the critical aspects that we really need. And of course, thank you very much to this report, because it is really setting a very strong base from all the work that has been done, from the framework into the just transition implementation plan, into your JET IP. Now we are taking stock in as far as this is concerned. Let me acknowledge the Deputy Chair of the PCC and also acknowledge the commissioners present here. And I had the comment from the program director indicating that there's so many of them. It is actually, for me, an indication of work being done, and a lot of work being done, and now saying, let's take stock and how best can we improve. And let me acknowledge the commissioners present here. Executive Director, I'm acknowledging you, and also representatives from the different constituency. For me, I think what is coming through is something that really needs to be focused on. And ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great pleasure for us as government to receive such a report. And this report documents notable impacts of climate change in South African society at large. And it is pleasing to indicate that this launch is coinciding, as already highlighted, with the assenting of the Climate Change Bill to Act. And for us, we really are appreciative to the Honorable President. In fact, I was saying in a symposium last week, before the 29th of May, he was signing quite a number of them, and we kept on looking through the window to say, where exactly is the climate change? And finally, it is here. And this is a very significant milestone, because then it begins to say, we need to begin to operationalize what is in that act. We need to begin to also ensure that at the end of the day, we bring all stakeholders that are actually quite critical. And of course, this act, which the Honorable President has assented, is quite critical in ensuring there's alignment in policies. And I think the report begins to identify a gap in terms of fragmentation. We believe that as the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, we then need to ensure that there is an alignment in policies in as far as the response that we are going to implement as a country, as society, in building a climate resilient economy. It is indeed true that as a country, climate change is here, it's with us. All these disasters that we're experiencing, and the latest one on the fires in KZN, it's a very clear indication that we really need to step up in as far as our concerted action across all forms of society. The report underscores that just transition is central in terms of our response to climate change. And therefore, this is putting lives and livelihoods of people at the heart of climate response. And also it ensures that the vulnerable and also all society that are impacted on by climate change are indeed protected and supported. And I think the panel would not have said it better in terms of the various input that they've made. We need to ensure that we support and we empower. We empower all these stakeholders of society in ensuring that this transition is indeed just. The report also is going into aspects of resourcing, and I think local government representative Salka has indicated that there's one of the gaps that we are confronted with in terms of financing, and basically what then it calls for is that needs to be scaled up, and also fit for purpose finance is required, especially when it gets to foreign or international funding, and even local funding, domestic funding. We really need to prioritize our grants and concessional finance so that we can then effectively deploy these resources towards ensuring that we create an enabling environment for rapid investment. And of course, this investment must buy down risk and also create asset classes that are clean investment, which will then be facilitated through the various partnerships and leveraging of resources by both public and the private sector. And also key to this, the president has announced that as South Africa, we need to establish the Climate Change Response Fund. And I'm happy to highlight that we're already beginning to work with the PCC on this work. And there is a very need to ensure that we bring together the various funders and ensure that we mobilize resources that then will ensure that we do have funded initiatives as called out by this report. Critical for us as government, and specifically as the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, is that this report is actually going to assess and it's going to inform already what we are putting together as a biannual transparency report. As a country, we have to submit this report to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate, which is the UNFCCC. And this we have to do and submit by the end of December, I think this year, 2024. And this is in line with the Paris Agreement notebook. So this for us is very, very critical, Deputy Chairperson and commissioners, as forming a basis and an input to that requirement. I've already highlighted that we have published our sets, which is the sectoral emissions targets. And these, I would want to believe, all stakeholders presented here, we need to engage and interact with, provide us with all the comments and inputs that are required. What then this process entail is that it will assist us in implementation of the NDCs, as already been highlighted. Yes, we have to also look into reviewing the NDCs moving forward. And also what it does, it also is informed by policies and measures. But critical is that we need now on our day-to-day work of government, work of society, we need then to begin to mainstream the issues of climate change. What also one wants to just flag is that as a country, we have a sophisticated greenhouse gas emissions monitoring systems, and this has helped shape our carbon tax system. And the work is underway in order to ensure that we have monitoring systems that also takes into account tracking carbon budgets and also the mitigating plans that need to be allocated to industries as per the requirement of the Climate Act. And I think Deputy Chairperson and Commissioners, we welcome the release of this State of Climate Action report, which really provides critical assessment of our collective progress that we've made thus far in terms of addressing the climate threat that we are confronted with. And as a department and also as government, we are committing to using the insights and recommendations from this report to inform scaling up of the actions that are required from the government side. Thank you very much, and thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, DG. I must make sure that you don't leave the report behind. With that said, now can I call on Dr. Crispin Olva to come and do us the summary and then the closure, and then we'd make announcements about lunch and all other matters incidental there too. Dr. Olva.
Thank you, Blessing. My staff always put me at the end of the program so that I come in and do damage control. And I'm very pleased to report that there's no damage to control. I think this has been a really excellent and entertaining launch. I've seldom been as captivated by, two panels that dug into the various aspects. And I must say it's a real pleasure and honor, DG, to have you at this launch. Your department can be justifiably proud of what you've achieved with getting this climate bill in place. And as our deputy chair said, 6 years of work. Melissa, 6 years of work. It's a real crowning achievement, and it's a comprehensive regulatory framework in place for driving across all of our climate adaptation and mitigation areas. So it's great that it comes at the beginning of the 7th administration. We had timed this report to sort of kickstart, lay a foundation for the 7th administration to critically assess where we are and what needs to be done. As we all know, it's a government of national unity, so there are a diversity of political parties represented in the GNU. Our own experience as a commission is that diversity is a strength, not something to be feared. It in fact enriches and enlivens and injects energy into the debates that we have. So, I think this GNU is going to be taking us into an interesting and probably more productive 7th administration. Just to maybe reinforce one of the points that was made, the climate bill is extremely important. It needs to work in concert with a range of sectoral regulatory instruments. I think Thomas crisply pointed out that our energy planning system and the IRP, which we understand is being updated and will be published in the near future, that's one of the key, energy planning instruments. We've had commitments from Minister Creasy that she's going to make the green transport strategy a reality. She's very keen to see transport sector reforms taking place. The Minister of Agriculture has told us that he's going to make sure that climate smart agriculture moves off the design shelf and into real action and implementation. So Janse, we look forward to that. And yeah, water, of course, is vitally important. And those of you that were following, so last week we had this very important National Treasury Climate Resilience Symposium. And I mean, I have to say, over the years, we've all looked at the various things National Treasury is doing. They've implemented the carbon tax. I have never seen an event in which every division of National Treasury, budget management, macroeconomics, assets and liabilities, all the tax people, I mean, across every sector, intergovernmental finance, they were all there, for 3 days discussing how do they mainstream, sorry, Joanne, how do they mainstream climate resilience across all of the Treasury functions. So, you're starting to see the full, fiscal system align up with the climate objectives that we've set. So that gives me great hope. Climate bill, Treasury's mainstreaming, all of these sectoral departments starting to stand behind their different agendas. I think we genuinely are in a new era of climate action. So on that note, thank you all very much for coming. Thank you to our deputy chair and all of our commissioners who you saw in their full, wonderful diversity. They really are a powerful team. Thank you, DG, for gracing us with your presence and for the rest of your team. It was a real honor to have you here. And yeah, we will watch the space, stay engaged, keep us on our toes, keep government on their toes, keep the other sectors, business, labor, civil society also on their toes. There's work to be done. Let's roll up our sleeves and get going.
Thank you, Executive Director, for that closing summation. I just want to close by thanking the communications team. Otherwise, they say I never support them after they've hosted successful events, and then the logistic team, but the rest of the secretariat that continues to work in an integrated way to support each of the other units. But also the media. I think that for the last 2 weeks, we have kept you busy on climate change, and you've really heeded the call and come to the event with the president, came to the launch of our finance mechanism report. You are here today. And lastly, I'm looking forward to seeing you again on the 6th of August, which is our another major event on financing the infrastructure grid, which we are doing collectively with the Johannesburg Security Exchange on the 6th of August. Stock Exchange, Johannesburg Stock Exchange, or I said Securities Exchange. It might be the same. It depends on where you did your MBA, ED. With those words, colleagues, indeed, thank you very much. Lunch is being served just outside on the left. That's where we can go and mainstream our appetite. Thank you very much. Bye.
She'll take a